Did you know that viruses might be the culprit behind a lot of autoimmune conditions and really a lot of other health problems? Well, join me today and we're going to discuss this link between hidden or latent, meaning they hide out in our tissues, these viruses, and autoimmune diseases. So if you're interested in learning more about how to control your health and find out if you have viruses that are driving some of your health problems, especially autoimmunity, then you're going to want to stay with me for this episode. Welcome to the Hashimoto's Doctor podcast. You're now part of a growing community of people determined to take their health back through education and self-empowerment. But because of the healthcare system today, we don't have access to the types of healthcare that we want. So we have to do things differently. We've got to do things smarter, and we do that by becoming our own advocates. This podcast will give you the perspective and thoughts of one of the world's leading Hashimoto's doctors. So let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of the Hashimoto's Doctor podcast. I'm your host, Brad Shook, and today we're going to dive into a topic that's just absolutely fascinating and actually, kind of scary. We're going to talk about this world of chronic viral infections and how they're connected to a number of different disease processes, but in particular, they seem to have a really significant and strong link to the development of some autoimmune conditions. One of those being Hashimoto's thyroiditis, an autoimmune condition that I'm really familiar with and that a lot of people suffer with. It's the most common autoimmune condition, and it leads to hypothyroidism, and it's the number one cause of a low thyroid in the United States. It causes a low thyroid state because the autoimmune process destroys the thyroid gland, resulting in the gland not being able to produce enough hormone. And it's estimated that 9 out of 10 cases, 9 out of 10 people that you know that are on a thyroid replacement hormone, they have it because they have an autoimmune condition that's destroying their thyroid. It's not that their thyroid just doesn't work. It's actually that their immune system is destroying their thyroid for some reason. So why is that? And that's what I do in practice. I help people to investigate the triggers and drivers of autoimmune diseases. And one of the categories of things that we look at are called pathogens. From a functional medicine perspective, and quite frankly, just from an immunological perspective, like what do the researchers that study immunology look at? And for triggers and drivers of autoimmunity. And guess what? They look at 3 major categories of triggers. They look at food and food proteins. They look at pathogens. And pathogens is this umbrella term for bacteria, viruses, which is what I'm talking about today, fungal infections, parasites. All of these things, they contribute to and drive these various immunological or immune responses within the body that can trigger and drive autoimmunity. And today we're going to talk about one of these things that's just absolutely, it's fascinating. It's wild to me how, just amazing life is and how fascinating some of these connections are. So today I want to talk about viruses, and in particular, we're going to touch on Epstein-Barr virus, which is a really significant contributing factor. So whether you're, have listened to the podcast for a long period of time or you're just tuning in, stay with me because this is going to get interesting. Let's start with the basics. Autoimmune diseases like Hashimoto's are conditions where our immune system is attacking our body. And it's doing this mistakenly because our immune system is supposed to be protecting our tissues, not destroying them. So if this is something that's happening to you or someone that you know, if you're autoimmune, the question that you need to be asking is, why is my immune system that should be protecting me attacking my own tissues? And then the next thing should be, well, what are the triggers? Or, why is this occurring? What are the triggers? And this is something that's super important and that can help a lot of people to significantly improve their autoimmune condition. It's regardless of which autoimmune condition it is to think in the terms of Why is this occurring? What are the triggers and the drivers of this process? And if your doctors tell you that they don't know and that it's unknown, that's not entirely true. There are so many things that you can do to look for the drivers and perpetuators of autoimmunity and have a modulating effect on the immune system to dampen the autoimmune process, and if you're lucky, put it into remission where it's not active. And I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do. It just depends on what the mix of triggers are. So we're going to talk about viral triggers, and in particular we're talking about Epstein-Barr. So it's interesting that there's a lot of research out there. If you get on PubMed, which is where a lot of the medical literature is indexed, you can just do keyword searches and see what you find. And there is a tremendous amount of literature there. But some of the recent research suggests that these chronic viruses, that we get infected with and that lay dormant, so you go through an acute infection, something initial where you have a lot of symptoms and then it seems to go away, they may be just hanging out in our tissues, not causing an active infection or symptoms that we would associate with a viral infection. This is really, really important concept to understand, because these things play a much bigger role in autoimmune disease and chronic disease processes than we thought. And Epstein-Barr virus is, a really common virus. By the time we're 20 years of age, it's estimated that 90% of the population, or 90% of us, have been exposed to it. And this was called, or is called and referred to as the kissing disease pretty frequently, because it's passed so easily by salivary transmission. And so the thing is that, this typically, when you get mono, or which is caused by Epstein-Barr, if you've had mono, you've been told you have mono, which is really referencing the fact that when you get exposed to Epstein-Barr virus, the classic signs and symptoms will be present. The fatigue, typically swollen lymph nodes, you'll have some swollen lymph nodes. And if you have a blood test done, you'll see on the complete blood count under the white blood cells that the monocytes, a type of white blood cell, are typically elevated above the lab range. And so that, in combination with your history of how, or you may have been exposed to it, and then your symptoms, is how you get diagnosed with it. But it's called mono because the monocytes, that type of white blood cell, are elevated. So it's mononucleosis. And this is something that after that initial infection, it stays in the tissues in a dormant or latent state until the immune system is weakened, and then it can reactivate. And that's what you'll see a lot of times. And this is something that will make more sense to you if you think about herpes type 1 virus, which causes oral blisters and ulcerations, right? So it's like the fever blister. Well, that's actually a human herpes virus. And this is type 1, causes oral ulcerations, blisters, and then ulcerations. And if you think about how that works, if you have human herpes virus 1, or if you know someone that has these recurrent fever blisters, what happens is that the virus, you get exposed to it initially. It will typically cause an initial outbreak. Then it will go into the immune system, will fight off the virus and will dampen the virus enough that you're not expressing any symptoms of the virus. So the blister that forms from the viral activity will turn into an ulcer, and then it will start to heal. And then once it heals, you're like, oh, I'm better. But really what's happened is the virus has gone into a dormant or latent state where it lives in the nerve root of your trigeminal nerve, your one of the nerves of your face. It's a sensory nerve, and you have branches that come from the brainstem and that go into and around the mouth. And so when you are in a weakened state, or you're run down and your immune system is suppressed, this virus can reactivate, and you can then have another another outbreak of the herpes virus, and you have another blister and ulceration, and you go through this, and it can be very frustrating. And that is an example of how these viruses can be active from an initial infection, go latent or dormant, and then become reactivated when our immune system becomes stressed or weakened, typically in, after, like sleep deprivation or something where we're under a significant amount of stress. There are several different triggers and things that can suppress the immune system, but that is typically how you'll see these reactivations occur. So, Epstein-Barr virus does the same thing, and there are other viruses that will act very similarly to this, like human herpes virus 5, which is called CMV or cytomegalovirus, and then also it's human herpes virus 6, roseola, which is a lot of children will get roseola, or at least used to. And these can be triggers and activators of autoimmune diseases too. Okay, so if you're wondering whether Epstein-Barr is playing a role in your health or your autoimmunity, there's a few things that you want to consider. So first of all, you want to do some testing to give you an idea about its current status. Is it, do you have a reactivation of the virus, or do you have a pattern that's associated with past exposure? Most people aren't dealing with an acute infection. I mean, this is something that usually happens earlier in life, and it's usually acute, meaning you have all these symptoms and you go to the doctor for it, and they will triage it and diagnose it. But most people that are going to be listening to this that have an autoimmune condition, you're not going to be in that situation. You're either going to have, wonder if you're having a pattern of reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus, or if you have antibodies against it that would indicate that it's a past infection but not currently being reactivated. And so, of course, if it's being reactivated, we want to take some steps to try and dampen it, which we'll talk about in a second. But so the first thing is get some testing done. And most of the major laboratories offer these Epstein-Barr panels that will look at 4 different antibodies to Epstein-Barr, different parts of the virus. And depending on the pattern, like how it comes back, like which ones come back positive, there's a key that comes with the lab test result. And all you do is match it up and you see what how to interpret it. That's how you can interpret the test and see whether you're having a reactivation or a past infection. So that's a great way to do it. That's how I recommend if you're going to test for Epstein-Barr virus. If you're looking at some of the other viruses, you can do some antibody tests there as well, but they're not as clear as the Epstein-Barr reactivation panel. And you could do something like a PCR test, a screening test that looks at a lot of different viruses to see if you have a high viral load, which would mean that it's active or it's reactivated. But those tests, I don't do those as much in practice as I used to, because most of the time I'll do a pathogen screening panel that looks at a lot of the common viruses that we know are associated with triggering and reactivating autoimmunity, in combination with bacteria, with parasites, and then also with different types of fungi that are known to be triggers and perpetuators of the autoimmune process. And if those come back elevated, then we want to consider looking at those more closely to see if we need to confirm if it is an active or a past infection. And sometimes just based on the symptoms plus those test results, we'll put together a protocol to try and support the immune system and just treat it as if it's active without going further, because sometimes it can be hard and difficult to make a clear determination on whether or not you're having a reactivation. So sometimes you just want to then start focusing on treating it as if you do have a reactivation of the virus. And you could do that, quite frankly, I've worked with a lot of people where we don't have this information, and we just implement the dietary, the lifestyle strategies, and then some nutritional supplementation to support part of the immune response and the immune system that will typically help to dampen viral infections or viral reactivations. So there are a few different ways to approach it, but it's great if you can get some quantitative data to give you some guidance. It's not always crystal clear. It doesn't always give you a perfect path forward, but it gives you a better starting point. That's always how the testing works, or at least that's how I view it, is that it allows us to get a better starting point so that there's less trial and error that we need to implement. So that's where I would begin. First of all, consider getting some testing done. The Epstein-Barr reactivation panel is a good one, and it's available through most commercial laboratories. And that's something that we help people with. My clients that I work with will often order that test if we suspect that it's a potential problem. And so then the next thing that we want to talk about is what are some of the dietary, lifestyle, and nutritional supplementation strategies that we might want to consider implementing if we're dealing with a viral reactivation that might be a trigger or perpetuator of our autoimmunity. Now, once you get your test results in, you need to decide how you're going to support your immune system to try and dampen the reactivation of a virus. And so, of course, we're just assuming that you did a test and that you have a positive result. Now, if you think that you have the issues that you're experiencing because you have viral reactivation, if you have some sort of other confirmatory evidence, maybe you have a complete blood count with differential, which would show you your white blood cells, and it will break down the different types of white blood cells. And remember, I said that one of the types of white blood cells are monocytes, and monocytes tend to be, they are elevated when you have Epstein-Barr. They elevate with other things as well. And so you are guessing to some degree, but if you saw that you had a shift in your white blood cells, maybe the percentage of your white blood cells, the monocytes, was above the 8%, which is generally what is taught as far as a normal percentage of the total white blood cell count. Your monocyte total would be around 8%. If it were shifted a little bit higher, not necessarily way out of the lab range, of course, you always want to check with your doctor before you do anything. But let's just say, and in my clinical experience, I have observed that in people that have reactivation of Epstein-Barr, oftentimes they'll have a shift in their monocytes slightly higher than you would typically see. So when I start seeing monocyte percentages that are up around 10%, and this may not be outside of the laboratory range, you also want to look at like what they call the absolute value of the monocytes. This is usually not outside of the monocyte laboratory range or above it, but you start seeing it shifting higher. I start thinking, could this be related to Epstein-Barr? And this is a pretty common thing that I'll come across, especially with certain autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's. There tends to be a higher prevalence, and there are other autoimmune diseases that have a higher association with Epstein-Barr virus, like lupus, for example, is also one. So when you get this information, let's say from testing, and let's say you have a reactivation, or let's say that you think that there's a viral issue and you want to try to support it and see how you feel. And again, before you do anything, talk to your doctor, consult with a functional medicine doctor, do something so that you're not just out there doing something that may be dangerous for you, which, the things that I'm going to share with you here are typically things that you would do normally to try and optimize your health and physiology. And then the supplementation protocol is something that is tailored more towards Epstein-Barr and dampening viral activity in general. But again, check with your doctor, make sure it's right for you, that there are no risk factors for you, and that something like this might be okay. So let's say you are trying to dampen viral activation. This is where I would take, the functional medicine approach, and what I call the functional medicine approach, which is really looking at trying to be a better physiologist, trying to understand the chemistry and support the body's chemistry in a way that gives you a better outcome and a more ideal expression of health. To be, somewhat philosophical there, what you're going to consider doing in this situation is you want to utilize supplementation that supports better immune system regulation and immune system activation to dampen the viral activity. And just keep in mind, with the immune system, you always want it to work normally. You don't want to, quote, boost the immune system necessarily. What you want is a normally functioning immune system. You want an immune system where you get, when you're exposed to a pathogen or something foreign, the immune system is in a surveillance mode. It sees this foreign, let's say, virus, and when it sees the virus, that it responds by creating inflammation to destroy and dampen the virus. And then once the virus is cleared, then it comes back down. The inflammation resolves. There's actually a resolution of inflammation and the immune system uses inflammation as part of the healing process. That's the first stage in the healing process, is inflammation. It has to occur in order to help with clearing some of the pathogens and things that we're exposed to. That is part of the mechanism of eliminating the virus in this case. And then once it's eliminated, then the immune system should come back down into a state of surveillance. And that requires resolution or resolving the inflammatory process. And then you want the immune system to be in a state of surveillance where there is very low inflammation, but it's ready, right? So that's a normal response. And a lot of times that is kind of glossed over. We don't think about that when we're thinking about, I just want to boost my immune system. That can actually be a bad thing for some people that are autoimmune to, quote unquote, boost your immune system, to get to use supplementation or other things and push the immune system, because we do know, and what I'm going to share with you, there are some vitamins and herbs and things that can help to stimulate different parts of the immune system. And that can actually be a bad thing for some people that are autoimmune. And this is again where you want to talk and work with someone that understands these factors so that you can better minimize the chance that something could happen that would make you feel worse or potentially create more problems for you. So to dampen a virus, you want to take like a more, you could use the word holistic, but comprehensive approach. And so one thing is you want to consider dietary factors, you want to consider lifestyle factors, and you want to consider supplementation. So let's kind of start with the dietary stuff. So from a dietary perspective, anytime you're talking about like dampening a viral activation or improving just in general, trying to support better immune system health and function, one of the things that I've seen clinically and that really seems to work is supporting the health of your digestive tract bacteria and just the overall health of your gut. And what I mean by that is supporting your GI tract bacteria so that you have good abundance of bacteria, you have good diversity of GI tract bacteria, and so that your mucosal lining, the lining of the intestine, is healthy, it's functioning optimally. And this is all important because all of your mucous membranes, everywhere, you have like a mucus layer, so the inside of your mouth all the way through until, it comes out, that is a tube that runs through your body. And the lining of this tube is an interface between technically the outside world and the inside world of your bloodstream and where your immune system resides. And this is a selectively permeable barrier system. And if this barrier system becomes compromised, becomes inflamed, is broken down, and things can easily pass into the bloodstream, you can have some major issues with your immune system. This is actually, one of the most critical aspects of autoimmunity is trying to support and make sure that the intestinal barrier and lining is intact and has good integrity. Now there are plenty of situations where the gut is not critical to focus on, but it's definitely not something you want to neglect or not consider. So dietary perspective, you typically want to eat a diet that has diverse plant-based fibers and phytonutrients. So a lot of different colors. Plus, I believe, and from my clinical experience and what I've seen people thrive and do well with, is that you should also eat plant-based. You should eat sufficient plants, primarily fruit, and less vegetables. If you're going to eat vegetables, they should be prepared in a way that breaks down some of the potential anti-nutrients inside the the stems and the leaves and the roots of the vegetables, which just means typically cooking them so that you have some you degrade some of the anti-nutrients, but also eating a lot of protein. Animal-based protein is absolutely critical. And if you don't consume enough protein, then your body will not be able to produce the enzymes and carry out the physiological processes of repair and detoxification. So just not having enough protein by itself can be a real mistake, a very significant mistake. So I would say anywhere from like 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So you have to take your body weight in pounds, convert it to kilograms, and then you could do like 1.2 times your weight in kilograms to give you a minimum amount of protein intake. And then if you exercise, I would say at least 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Okay, 1.7 grams. And I like animal-based sources are really important because you get the essential amino acids, you get a better amino acid profile, and I think that's a really important thing to consider. I mean, you can do it, I think, with plant-based sources, but I believe it's much more difficult. And then there are some other potential problems that you can incur there. And so I think it's easier, it's more efficient to eat like animal-based proteins, sufficient protein, get sufficient fiber, and and here's the thing, this is where it comes into like an individualized approach. Like some people will eat fiber and say, I feel terrible consuming fiber. And then so that opens up an entire, list of questions and things that you need to consider, like, okay, what type of fiber? How much are you eating? What do you normally eat? And you have to get into a detailed history and really dig and see what's going on and get more information so that you can figure out like, okay, well, maybe fiber is not the best thing for them to eat, or they need to eat a particular type of fiber, or they need to gradually increase their fibers. And so one of my favorite ways to get fiber in is through fruit. And I'm constantly looking at my thought processes on dietary strategies and intervention and questioning whether or not what I think to be true is indeed true. And this is something we should always be evaluating, our biases and our preconceived ideas, because I think that there's a place for a lot of the diets that are out there. Like some people will tell you like a Mediterranean diet's the best diet, and that does appear to be a pretty good diet for people. Other people will tell you that a vegan diet's a good diet, and then on the other hand, carnivore diets being the best diet. And I think that a lot of these diets they have a place, a time and a place for sure. But my general observation has been with the population of people that I work with, and then me personally, is that an autoimmune paleo style of diet that has more predominant. It's heavier in fruits that have diverse color. So we're getting phytonutrients, which are prebiotics for our gut bacteria. The fruit also contain a significant amount of fibers, and the sugars in the fruit, I try to eat, and I've covered this in another podcast, but I try to eat the fruit around when I exercise more and shift I have an entire podcast on early time restricted feeding. I would encourage you to check out, but I go into this in more detail, which I think would be, if you would just listen to that podcast, it would explain the dietary strategy that I think is best for people that are maybe everyone, or most people's health, I should say, and then definitely for people that are autoimmune. That early time restricted feeding model is pretty good. There are people that need to eat even more frequently, and they don't need to restrict when they eat to a specific window. But again, that's an individualized strategy. Overall, animal-based proteins, sufficient animal-based protein, 1.2 kilograms or 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, up to, if you exercise, 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And some people that are really, really active, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So that's 1 gram per pound. It's higher still. So that can be really, really helpful. And then getting good and healthy fats into the diet are also really important there. So you're getting sufficient fibers, because these are all, so getting the fibers into the diet, that helps to feed the gut bacteria. And then if you can eat some fermented foods like kimchi, kefir, if you don't have problems with dairy, and a lot of people that are autoimmune have problems with dairy, so you can also get, which is fine. And I typically recommend eliminating dairy if you're autoimmune, at least for a period of time. And I like to see laboratory testing to see if we have any antibodies against dairy proteins that can give us more clues as to how the immune system views dairy. But this is overall a pretty good strategy. And I'll go one step further and say, even if you don't have good digestion, I like to take the autoimmune paleo diet and put it into a crock pot or an instant pot to help with kind of pre-digesting the food by breaking it down with heat over a prolonged period of time. There's some delicious ways to do that. That can be a fantastic strategy too, to reduce some of the anti-nutrients and the things in leaves, stems, roots that can be problematic for us, plant defense chemicals that can be problematic for some of us. So hopefully that gives you some idea about diet. To sum it up, animal-based proteins, sufficient protein, in combination with sufficient fiber and eating colors of the rainbow phytonutrients. I think, and is this the perfect diet? Is this the only way to do it? No. But does this work for a lot of the people that I've worked with from a functional medicine perspective, working with people that are autoimmune? Yes, for sure. And then, you can get the vegetables typically are better if they can be broken down through cooking them in a typically a long slow process like a slow cooker or a crock pot or an instant pot tend to be really effective ways to help make those more digestible and absorbable. Though me personally, I have started to trend away a little bit from the greens and the leaves and the stems and whatnot, and even to some degree the root vegetables. But this is not, this is again not a one-size-fits-all recommendation. So diet. So I have gone on and on about diet. So let's go into the next thing, which is, or I should say, are the lifestyle modifications and interventions that you want to consider. Okay, let's talk about the lifestyle factors very quickly and briefly. So lifestyle factors to consider. The most important one, the absolute most important lifestyle factor when you're dealing with trying to get your immune system to work optimally and to help you with dampening a virus is, number one, going to be sleep. Above and beyond everything else, it's going to be sleep, because sleep is when your immune system rejuvenates, reprograms, and kind of resets. And if you don't get sufficient sleep, and if you don't get enough deep sleep, you're going to really set yourself up for a suppressed immune system and for viral reactivation, and just for, being susceptible to all kinds of health problems. Poor sleep is linked to a tremendous number of health problems. So optimizing sleep is number one, and there are a lot of resources for optimizing sleep in the transformation program. If you go to thyroidprogram.com, I have a program that you can join. It's very, very inexpensive, and you can join the program, and I have a full outline of everything that you can consider doing as far as sleep goes. There's an entire section on sleep and sleep optimization. So that's something that you can consider. But just in general, you want to try to go to bed at the same time every night and wake up at the same time. You want to shoot for 7 to 9 hours. Typically, the people I work with that are autoimmune, some of them need, closer to the higher end there, 8 to 9 hours. You want to have a dark room. You want to have the room you want it to be cool. The ideal temperature is typically somewhere around 68 degrees. And that's for most people, around 68 degrees, and you want to block all the light that you can possibly block. And that will help you to achieve a deeper state of sleep. Now, there are supplementation strategies, there are dietary strategies, not eating too close to when you go to bed, like at least a 3-hour gap from when you last you last eat to when you go to sleep. That can be a really effective way to help as well. But there are numerous things that we can do to try to help optimize sleep. And then I recommend tracking sleep. We're using a smartwatch, a ring of some sort, like a smart ring, or even smartphone apps. And those are all things that I'm an advocate of doing. So sleeping is going to be huge. The second thing would be stress management. If you live a really stressed life, if you have emotional stress, if you have stress with because of physical pain and you're in pain all the time, that's a physiological stressor as well. If you are, if you have chemical stress, if you are on a lot of medications that are hard on your body, I mean, you can't avoid some of those things. But if you have a high level of inflammation, that's also a type of chemical stress. Then you want to try to figure out why these things are elevated so that you can dampen and correct those issues to lower the physiological stress that you're experiencing. And if you're like, well, what is this stress that you speak of? Like, how do you know? Well, you often know because you feel stressed, and most people know what they feel like when they're stressed. But there's also a good way, if you have a way to track your biometrics, you can look at heart rate variability. And I really like to use heart rate variability to establish a baseline for my stress. And it's a way to get a window or insight into your autonomic nervous system and the balance between your fight or flight response and your rest or digest side of your nervous system, the autonomic system. And your fight or flight is the sympathetic nervous system, and the rest and digest division is the parasympathetic nervous system. So the heart rate variability measures gaps in time between heartbeats, and that can be a very efficient way to get a window into the activity of your autonomic nervous system, and in particular, a window of observation into your fight or flight response, the sympathetic drive. So these are all things that you can do. There are smartwatches that do that. You can go to, I believe it's First Beat or HeartMath. HeartMath is a website you can go to where they have a lot of different technologies that you can utilize to actually try to train and observe your heart rate variability. But I have a Garmin watch that tracks it, and that's a good way for me to establish a baseline and know where I'm at and kind of observe my recovery based on several factors, but sleep and also change in heart rate variability and heart rate and temperature, and a lot of really great things that if you have as a way to, as a window into your physiology on a daily basis, can be really helpful. You don't need all those things, but step one as far as lifestyle goes is going to be sleep by far. Okay, so just from a lifestyle perspective, if there's only one thing you can focus on, sleep. Dietary perspective, protein, fiber, and diversity in colors is helpful. Good fats, support optimal gut health, because so much of your immune system is controlled and regulated due to the influence of the health or lack thereof of your intestinal environment. So those things are really helpful. Now, from a supplementation perspective, so again, and I've repeated this, but this goes for the entire podcast. Talk to your doctor. This is just informational in nature before you make any changes, or get with a good functional medicine doctor that can help you to tailor a strategy for you based on your unique situation. So as far as supplementation goes, to support the immune system and dampen the effects of viruses like Epstein-Barr virus, some specific supplementation protocols can be real helpful in combination with diet and sleep. So some of the go-to supplements that I utilize are going to be antiviral herbs, which I'll mention in a second. L-lysine is an amino acid, can be really helpful. And that can also be really helpful for like herpes viruses, any of the viruses this is going to apply to. But I've worked with people that have herpes simplex type 1 and 2. And there are protocols you can put people on to completely dampen those, almost certainly, in combination with minimizing the amount of arginine that they take in as amino acid. People often eat nuts and things that have high arginine, and that causes them to have activation of these herpes viruses. So minimizing that can be real helpful too. But L-lysine can be really helpful, and then some other things like zinc is really very, very helpful. Vitamin C can be very, very helpful. And of course, you want to get as many of these things from your food as you can, but oftentimes we can't get sufficient amounts. And oftentimes, initially, I find that it's better to increase the dose of some of these vitamins, minerals, these amino acids, and using some of these herbs and increasing, taking them and giving them in an increased concentration or dose initially for a week or so. It really helps to kind of jumpstart the process and support the immune system in the right direction that we want it to go, and can help to make some more rapid improvements than just saying, okay, I'm just going to try to get all this from food, because I don't think that's practical. Let's put it that way. So those are some of the supplementation. One of the best things I would say for Epstein-Barr virus is going to be monolaurin. I don't know if you've heard of monolaurin or not, but monolaurin is derived from coconut oil, and that's monolaurin, monolaurin. And it can be really, really helpful. It seems to have some very significant antiviral properties, and taking it can be a game changer for people in combination with some of these other things. And it's been really found to be effective with Epstein-Barr. So let's see, what else? I would guess, so there are some things that support like the antiviral, what I would call like more of an antiviral part of there are ways to support part of the immune system that are responsible for dampening viruses. And what I'd mentioned, some of these things are really helpful. Monolaurin, L-lysine, antiviral herbs, like I would say probably one of the most significant is going to be astragalus. Okay, astragalus is really, really helpful. And there are formulations that I'll use that have a lot of these things kind of in one, that have been formulated specifically to, for their antiviral protocols, or for antiviral support, by supporting primarily your Th1 system of the branch of the immune system, which has some antiviral properties when it's supported. Though I want to always just say, like, look, you take, when you use herbs and things that boost or push one side of the immune system, you run the risk of creating an environment where you can exacerbate your autoimmunity. So, this is where you got to work with someone that's like, okay, I'm not just going to throw stuff at you that might make you worse. What, as an underlying, like, foundational strategy, you want to make sure like you have adequate and robust levels of vitamin D. You want to make sure that your essential fats are balanced, that your omega-3 to omega-6s are balanced, because if you don't have enough omega-3 fats, if you have too many omega-6 fats, it actually encourages a pro-inflammatory state. You don't have enough of the ability to dampen the inflammatory process. So your essential fatty acid balance is really important, and most people are just way too deficient in omega-3s, and you really need omega-3s from animal-based sources, or at least from an algae, so that your body doesn't have to go through a complicated conversion process that sometimes it doesn't do very well. So vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids. Let's see, other things that can be really helpful. Vitamin A, sufficient vitamin A. Like, in general, a good multivitamin that doesn't have a bunch of things in it that will stimulate the immune system. And that's where it's like, there's a foundational strategy, making sure that you have adequate vitamin D and essential fatty acids, like from fish oil, is a good way to get it. But also to make sure that you're not deficient in any vitamins and minerals that are essential for normal biochemistry to occur. And I mean, if you haven't heard this, a lot of people have, but it's a good way to illustrate this fact is, magnesium is involved in hundreds of biochemical processes. So if you're deficient in magnesium, it's going to be a real issue for you to, have normal chemistry and normal immune function, because magnesium is a cofactor in so many biochemical processes, meaning it's required. So if you're deficient, you're going to have inefficient biochemistry. You're going to have some significant problems. So if you can just support vitamins, minerals, vitamin D, essential fatty acids, and then make sure that you have, like, I like to utilize a multivitamin that, again, doesn't have a bunch of herbs and things in it that might stimulate the immune response, because that is, that can be a problem for people that are autoimmune. That's a good, foundational basis. And then when you build on top of that, things like monolaurin, L-lysine, antiviral herbs, echinacea. Some of these things can be even more helpful, but you want to have a good foundational protocol and then optimize the lifestyle factors. I mean, I'll go as far to tell you that if you're going to have a very difficult time dampening viral activation if you are not sleeping. I mean, I could just tell you, and I don't care what you're taking as far as a bunch of supplements go, you have to optimize your sleep. I mean, it is like the cornerstone of your health. I think it's even more important than diet. I really do. Now, diet influences sleep for sure. I mean, all these things kind of go, they're connected, but optimizing sleep is one of the things you need to be shooting for when you're trying to dampen these viruses. If you found this episode helpful, please share and leave a review. It really helps the podcast. And as always, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can also follow us on YouTube and Facebook at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. You can join our Facebook group, the Greater Hickory Thyroid Support Group with over 11,000 members, and you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Brad Shook. And remember, together, we can make a difference. As we wrap up, remember that understanding the root cause is the first step to healing. Whether it's a virus or another trigger, knowledge is power, and identifying the driver or trigger of the process is the first step. So stay curious, keep learning and informing yourself, and most importantly, stay hopeful. We're all in this thing together. Until next time, have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out behind the scenes with Dr. Shook. You can also talk with and learn from Dr. Shook through Facebook Live on our Facebook page at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. Don't forget, you can also get access to our videos, guidebooks, and thyroid programs at www.drbradshook.com. Oh yeah, and don't forget one more thing. We can change the world one person, one family, and one community at a time. Until next time, remember, today is your day, and no one will tell you who you are and what you can be.